User stories are a popular technique to describe product functionality, and working with user stories is easy, but telling effective stories can be hard. In this video, I'll share my 5 top tips to help you create great user stories. I'm product management expert Roman Pichler, and I've used user stories for more than 15 years. As its name suggests, a user story tells a story about how a user employs a product and uses a specific piece of functionality. Take an online shop as an example. One user story might state how a user searches for an item, and another story might capture how they pay for it. To create the right stories, you have to know who the users are and why they would want to use the product in the first place, the main problem the product should address, or the primary benefit it should offer. What's more, I strongly recommend that your knowledge is based on first-hand experience and that you've acquired it by talking to or observing actual users. My first tip is therefore to clearly understand the users and their needs before you create any stories. If you lack the relevant knowledge, you risk writing stories that are based on assumptions and beliefs, but not on empirical evidence. Your stories might therefore be irrelevant or incorrect. Consequently, you might offer a product with the wrong user experience and the wrong features. My second tip is to collaborate on user stories. It's important to understand that a user story is not meant to capture a piece of functionality completely and precisely. It is not a requirement in a traditional sense. Instead, it only states what really matters in the form of an easy-to-understand narrative. The remaining information is largely communicated orally by collaboratively capturing and discussing the story. If you are the person in charge of the product, then it would be wrong to write the stories on your own and hand them off to a development team. This would most likely lead to misunderstandings and consequently suboptimal or wrong product functionality. You should therefore always work on user stories together with the development team or at least some of its members. This does not only ensure a shared understanding of the stories, it also allows you to leverage the team members' creativity and it encourages shared ownership. If you cannot collaboratively work on user stories, for example, because the software is developed remotely by another company, then I recommend using a more structured technique like use cases to describe the desired product functionality. Use cases have a goal, an actor, they have pre and post conditions, they come with a main and alternative success scenario as well as exceptions. They are way more comprehensive than a user story is. However, it takes longer and requires more effort to create and update them, so you lose the flexibility and agility user stories offer you. My tip number 3 is to keep your stories simple and concise. Now you can achieve this first of all by co-creating them with the development team, as I just recommended, and second, by applying the following template, which was originally created by Rachel Davies. As who, I want to what, so that why. Use this template as a starting point, but don't cling to it and don't feel obliged to always apply it. Instead, experiment with different ways to express your stories and find out what works best in your context. There is no one right way to tell a user story. My fourth tip is to start with epics and progressively refine them. An epic is a big coarse-grained story which is broken into several detailed user stories over time. You can think of it as a headline or a placeholder for more detailed stories. Starting with epics allows you to sketch the product functionality without committing to the details. This is particularly helpful for describing new features. It buys you time to learn more about how to best address the needs of the users, for example by demoing or releasing early prototypes. As an epic is too big to be implemented in a single sprint, it has to be broken into smaller, more specific stories that are testable. To ensure the latter, you should add acceptance criteria to your story. And these complement the narrative and describe the conditions that have to be fulfilled so that the story is done, that the resulting functionality can be demoed or released. For example, a payment story for an online shop might list the credit card types that can be accepted as the acceptance criteria. As a rule of thumb, I recommend using 3 to 5 acceptance criteria for each user story. My fifth and last tip is, don't solely rely on user stories. As helpful as they are, they have their limitations. For example, user stories are great at capturing product functionality, but they're not well suited to describing user journeys and the user interface design. You should therefore complement your stories with other artifacts, such as workflow diagrams, storyboards, sketches, and mockups. What's more, user stories are not great for stating technical requirements. If you need to describe what a software architecture element like a component or service should do, then either write technical stories or, which is my preference, use a modeling language like UML. Finally, employing user stories is worthwhile when you develop software that is likely to be used. But if you want to quickly create a throwaway prototype to validate an idea, then writing stories may not be necessary. Remember, user stories want to enable you to develop software as quickly as possible so you can deliver value fast, not to impose an overhead. I hope you found my tips helpful. You can learn more about user stories by attending my workshops and by reading my book, Agile Product Management with Scrum. Thank you for watching.